What's good, everybody? Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different and a little bit the same. The more things change, the more they stay the same. War always changes. Or it always stays the same. Just like in episode 1 and not like episode 2 or 3, we're going to be doing a pre-done subclass. I decided that it's just easier if I figure out, because I figure out what I'm going to do relatively quickly. It took me all of 2 seconds to figure out that I want to do the psychopath, because who doesn't want to do the psychopath fighter? That was fun. And when I was looking over the subclasses for the metadomain cleric episode, it was just like me scrolling through a couple of different things. I saw some things I was interested in, and then I was like, oh, metadomain cleric, that one sticks out to me. Let's do that one. So I just decided, F it, Weeball. I'm going to stick to what I do best, find what I want to do, and then I'm going to clear it out quick, fast, in a hurry. And today we have chosen the Acolyte of Death. This one's interesting and also a bit of a shame. The interesting part is that everybody always wants to make an anti-druid. Oh, why can't I make a druid who's like the nega druid? I want to bring death and destruction to everything. I don't believe in the cycle of life and death. I want pain. I want suffering. I want undeath. But the thing is, that's harder to do for druids than it is to do for something like a paladin or a cleric, because they don't really believe in gods. They kind of are the only real, genuine, true neutral class anymore, because everything they do is about balance. And the Spore druid kind of already does that, because they believe that undeath is cool as long as it's not in service of breaking the cycle and it's not permanent, because there's mushrooms that do that. There's mushrooms that serve as zombie fungi. I forget the name of it. I was like C something. I'll look it up later. But I thought an Acolyte of Death was really interesting because death is a part of life. Death is an extant form of life. And I think that there's a lot of merit there. I think there's a lot of interesting things for design there. And the Acolyte of Death, this says this subclass is granted to those who pledge their souls to the goddess of death. Immediate kind of red flag. They don't really believe in gods or goddesses. They can, and they do, but nature is their god. Nothing is above the cycle of life and death. Nothing defeats the service of the balance, nature. And then it says, grants the hand of death homebrew. Now, that was kind of interesting to me. I was like, okay, hold on. Let's hear you out. Let's hear what the hand of death subclass homebrew attachment thing you got here is. And going through this, the sad part of it was, and I'm sure you've noticed if you're looked down at some of the 6th through 14th level features, this is just the circle of land. This is just the circle of land without any of the class spells, which is really unfortunate. And even the bonus cantrip, you could have fleshed this out way more, and it feels like you kind of phoned this in to push your homebrew spell, I guess. But because you phoned it in, so many people in the comments are just like, hey man, this is just the circle of land. Nothing that is here relates to death at all. And you can see that in power increase. Your character has gotten stronger, gained a proficiency in athletics, faster increases in dex, smarter increases in wisdom, but that's not what increased smarts is. And it doesn't really explain how much of those stats that you get, how much your dexterity increases, how much your wisdom increases. There's no concrete identity here. Land stride, basically identical, word for word. Moving through non-magical terrain, costs you no extra movement. You can also pass through non-magical plants without being slowed by them and without taking damage from them if they have thorns, spines, or a similar hazard. In addition, you have advantage on saving throws virtually identical to Circle of Land. Unfortunate. Right down to Nature's Sanctuary, right down to the names. And the only thing that is identifiable to the Acolyte of Death, is the Hand of Death feature, and let's take a look at that right now. Here we have the Hand of Death, which is a 5th level spell with a range of 25 feet. Despite being a hand spell, it does not have a touch attack. It does not appear to have a saving throw. This is a 5th level spell. It's instantaneous. And it says it raises the temperature inside a body by 10 degrees Celsius. This results in any being with a natural temperature balance to boil from the inside, killing them instantly. It can be used once per short rest. Use it wisely. And that doesn't make a lick of sense either. But on the other hand, a lot of this doesn't really make sense. Raises the temperature inside a body by 10 degrees Celsius would probably not kill a Dungeons and Dragons character, like maybe a villager or like a regular civilian, but we're talking about people who can survive getting hit by meteors in the later levels, survive being hit by fireballs by 6th or 5th level. Boiling blood is not going to instantly kill these monsters walking in human bodies. And then on top of that, there's no real specific creature type that says this is limited to. So a natural temperature balance, say you wanted to boil alive obviously not a red dragon, but like say a black dragon or something. Who's to say? Who's to say what a, quote, natural temperature balance is defined as? It's way too early to get something like this. And then the whole caveat of can be only used once per short rest completely flies in the face of spell slots and available resources, all for the sake of pushing this one spell that this one subclass gets. Because of that, it has suffered heavily in the Department of Creativity. But that's where I come in. I believe that this shows a lot of that the idea of an Acolyte of Death that still falls in with the line of the concept of Druid craft, that falls in with the cycle of life and death and balance, is underutilized. Everybody wants to make an evil Druid, but nobody ever considers that death isn't evil. It's just non-discriminatory. So that's kind of what I wanted to play with here. Now, my first idea, before we get into the finished product, my first idea was to play with the idea that this was a kind of like a redesign of the Circle of Land and make different spell categories and different abilities based on the type of death, of onset death that the person chose. Like I could have done like rot, burning away, like being reduced to ash, cancer, drowning, kind of like just choosing causes of death. But I kind of just came to the realization that that would be so much extra work, and something like death doesn't want to, if it's not going to be discriminatory, then there's no reason for me to be discriminatory about the type of things that it gets. Death is death, and they wouldn't want to be anything as flowery as, oh, I'm death that's based on rot and decay, and I'm death that's based on shoving your head underwater until you stop breathing. And on the other hand, there's things like decay and rot and wildfires and ashes that have been done before. The spores and then the wildfire circles have already touched on that side of things. So this should just be its own thing. The Circle of Death should just be concerned with bringing an end to things, not necessarily caring how, just that it happens, and eventually being the catalyst for regrowth and rebirth. and I wanted to play with that idea. And I wanted to keep, obviously, the Hand of Death, because I do think that it's a good idea. I do think it's an interesting idea. So we played with that, and I mean me. And so, let's get right on into the background, and from there, the class features.
Druids of the Circle of Death, unlike those of the Circle of Spores or Wildfire, believe that there is nothing beautiful about the cycle of life and death. It is simple. It is ugly, and it is above all else a law of the universe. There is not a story without an ending, and there is no life worth living that does not reach a natural conclusion. To escape death would not be considered living. To that end, there is no prejudice within the circle of death. Life begets death, and death begets life. As fundamental as gravity and time and space, life and death go hand in hand. The power to grant demise to another is granted to those who pledge their souls to this cycle. For even the gods are not above this universal constant. There is no fear to be had in cold release, for death is the most important part of creating something new. Decay exists as an extant form of life. The wick of man burns near its wax, and we are the wind to finally extinguish its small, sad light. The metamorphosis of rot shall sire a glorious reincarnation.
Okie dokie. With that background out of the way, we can finally begin with the second level features, the bonus cantrip and the circle spells. When you choose this circle at second level, you learn the cantrip Decompose. This cantrip does not count against your total number of druid cantrips you learn, obviously. This is a homebrew necromancy cantrip, which comes from the critical role line of spells and things. This is a one-action touch spell with verbal and somatic components, and it lasts a minute. You reach out and touch a corpse of a creature. Over the next minute, the corpse begins to rapidly decompose, sprouting fungus and moss as it begins to degrade into compost and mulch. An odd-colored flower or two may also spring from the corpse in this time. Applicable requirements for resurrection are unaffected by this decomposition. This is simply to transfer nutrients into the ground, and people can still be recovered after the fact. And I think this is a really good start to the subclass. This does a great job of setting up what this subclass's identity is, its relationship to death, how it's not scared of it, and how it helps push forward into rebirth, how it does not shy away from life, but it embraces death. And next we have the circle spells. The circle spells. The circle's teachings conclude with spirits of decay and rot wreathing you with their blessing. You emanate a festering aura and break things down with a simple touch. Just a little flavor text. The bond you hold with these spirits grants you access to some spells when you reach certain levels in this class, as shown on the Circle of Death spells table below. Once you gain access to one of these spells, you always have it prepared, and it doesn't count against the number of spells you can prepare each day. If you gain access to a spell that doesn't appear on the Druid list, the spell is nonetheless a Druid spell for you. Then we have the second level gain of Hex and Ray of Sickness. Both will be very important for the identity of the Druid's subclass we're working with here, especially Hex. Third level, we get Ray of Enfeeblement and Wither and Bloom. Both excellent features again. And Wither and Bloom is a very excellent example. Just like Decompose, it draws energy out of things that you want to usher toward death, but it also uses some of that energy to replenish something that you decide needs to live a little bit longer. And then we have the 5th level of Catnap and Stinking Cloud. Catnap is a very underutilized spell in my experience. You send 3 people to sleep that are willing, of course. You render them unconscious, and then in 10 minutes, they gain the effects of a short rest. And what is sleep if not preparation for death? 7th level, we have, obviously, Blight. But we also have Sickening Radiance, which I think is a very interesting thing for these druids to have. It is an AoE, I think it's 40-foot radius circle that might be 30. No, I think that's Vitriolic Sphere. I think it is 40-foot radius. But it's a very big radius. It's either fireball size or double that. Maybe not double. I don't know how the conversion goes there as far as circumferences. I didn't do well with that kind of math. But it is a large circle that deals radiant damage to everybody in that light. But more importantly than that, it lasts 10 minutes. It's obviously concentration. It is something like the extra step beyond Moonbeam. But it also causes exhaustion levels to those who fail saving throws in that area. And because it lasts 10 minutes, that's plenty of time to end up dead off of 6 failed Constitution saving throws. I believe it is 6 seconds to a round, and that is 10 rounds to a minute. So that's... what is that? 100 rounds? 6 times... 60 seconds to a minute. God, this is embarrassing. 60 seconds to a minute, 10 rounds a minute, 10 minutes. Yeah, I was right! 100 rounds! What am I doing? I believe that it is an excellent spell for this type of druid that seeks to break things down to their very essence, that wants to reduce things to death. And then finally we have the 9th level, Enervation and Reincarnation. Enervation being the peak of the Ray of Enfeeblement, Ray of Sickness class of spell, and then Reincarnation being the Druid's Resurrection spell, which I think is very important for the domain of death, the circle of death, in that you can come back not as yourself, but truly as something entirely new. Death endorses reincarnation. Next up is the final 2nd level feature, Emboldened by Death. Starting at 2nd level, you draw power in being surrounded by death. When a creature is reduced to 0 hit points within 15 feet of you, you may use your reaction to draw in energy expelled from their weakness. When doing so, you gain temporary hit points equal to double your spell attack modifier. While you have temporary hit points in this way, the next spell attack you make has advantage. Yet another core fundamental part of this druid, Emboldened by Death. I wanted to find a way to remold that idea of becoming stronger, but I didn't want it to be a physical thing. I want it to be a kind of spiritual, magical bolstering of the body because of death. So, and I was told before that this subclass kind of, by Erin, I was told that this subclass reminded her of the Way of the Long Death Monk. And I've always felt like monks and druids kind of go hand in hand, as monks are the only other subclass to be recommended to go true neutral. And I feel like that you would kind of see a lot of monks and druids residing in the same circles, residing in like the Emerald Enclave. I feel like you would see a lot of monks and druids in the Emerald Enclave, along with rangers. This is a rather strong second level feature. The temporary hit points are always good, having just a little bit of bulk. It doesn't ever reach the same height as the Circle of Spores temporary hit points. It's never going to be 44. I believe the highest it can go up to is plus 11 modifier, and that's at level 20, so that's 22 temporary hit points. And then the spell attack, you might be wondering, why do we want to give advantage on spell attacks? None, like really only one spell that you got in this was for spell attacks, and we're going to come to that. That's going to be very important for just a moment. In just a moment, the advantage on spell attack is going to be very critical to the identity of this subclass as well. There's never going to be a point where temporary hit points isn't a good thing. It's never going to be so many temporary hit points that it feels overpowered, but it's always going to be like a nice sweet spot to give you some extra cushion. Next, we have the 6th level feature, Strength in Rot. Starting at 6th level, your body has become a biome that welcomes rot and decay. You feel at home when you are bringing about the end of things. When you cast a spell, you may use a wild shape to change the spell's damage to either necrotic or poison. When you alter a spell in this way, creatures damaged by the spell that are immune to either necrotic or poison are considered resistant, and creatures with resistance are considered neutral. I don't really have anything that I want to change about this, but it doesn't feel like it's strong enough for me. But honestly, Wizards of the Coast makes plenty of underpowered features with these subclasses, so not everything can be a home run. I do, however, feel like ignoring resistance and ignoring immunity is plenty strong at the end of the day. You don't really need to add anything to that just because I feel like I want to. And I could have sworn, I haven't really played a druid before, but I could have sworn they got more wild shapes than just 2. But that might be a recent change, or maybe I'm just not familiar with druids enough to be able to comment on it. But when I looked it up, they only have 2 wild shapes, and they, I think, get them back on a short or long rest, but only having 2 times they can do this is still a heavy enough nerf that I feel like is worth being able to ignore immunities and resistances. It's definitely a resilience killer, I feel like. And I feel like that's fine. That's fine enough. Next up, we have the 10th level feature, Hand of Death. When you reach 10th level, and this is the big one, when you reach 10th level, your hands beckon putrescence, even in that which is not natural, for there is nothing above the finality of death. As an action, make a melee spell attack against a creature. There we go, Emboldened by Death coming back. So having advantage on this is very big. And then on a hit, the creature must roll a Constitution saving throw against your Druid spell DC. And this is where Hex comes in, having disadvantage on Constitution saving throws, because by that level, a lot of the enemies that you're facing have incredibly high Constitution. Very, very difficult to, clear the Constitution hurdle of late game Dungeons and Dragons. On a failure, the creature suffers 8d10 necrotic damage or dies instantly if the creature has less than double your druid level in hit points. At this point, that's only 20 hit points. And I believe I draw that from Divine Word, which is a 7th level spell that also kills at 20 hit points or below, but that's an area of effect spell that affects all creatures within 30 feet that can hear you of your choice that have below 20 hit points to die instantly. This is a once per long rest feature that you have to do a lot of setup for, and it's single target and it's melee. There's a lot of caveats, but if you set up this perfect storm, it is just a instant death. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty neat. What makes this even better is because it's a melee spell attack, if it crits, That 8d10 turns into 16d10 approximately. And that's pretty great. That's pretty fantastic. It's like Blight on crack. And I think that's fun. I think that's really cool. This is another feature that Aaron told me was really similar to the Way of the Long Death Monk, but instead of pitting the power based on how many key points you're putting into it, this is just a one-time use nuke. And I feel like that's pretty... I don't feel like it's very overly reliable that you'll always be able to set it off, but later in the game when you're fighting a lot of higher health opponents, if you figure a single target that you want to just take out of the fight, nuke it down, this can be very reliable for that purpose. And then finally we have Contagious Sanctuary. By 14th level, your body is a nursery for plague and sickness. Your blood boils with an incurable fever, and your touch begets infection. You become resistant to necrotic and poison damage and cannot be poisoned or diseased, because obviously you already are. Additionally, while you have temporary hit points because of Emboldened by Death, you are immune to necrotic and poison damage and deal 1d6 necrotic and 1d6 poison damage to creatures that start their turn within 5 feet of you or enter your melee threat space for the first time. I think that this is probably fine. This is probably fine to have at this point. This is really just the capstone level. It's not the best part of the subclass, but it does a good job of healthily rounding out what the subclass can do. I think that the best feature of the subclass is very obviously Hand of Death, second only to Emboldened by Death, and then third only to Strength and Rot. Contagious Sanctuary is definitely not the best feature, but it does have a lot of good things to it. Being resistant to necrotic and poison, being immune to necrotic and poison, being immune to poisoned and diseased. It's definitely a really strong passive. It's a really reliable passive, and having Emboldened by Death is something you're very often going to have active. And that means that you're going to be, for the most part, immune to necrotic poison, the poison condition, and the disease condition for a majority of combat. And I feel like that's very reliable to have. And that is it. I think this is a very comfortable circle for the Druid to have. It's not necessarily evil, but it's not necessarily good. It's non-discriminatory. In fact, the only thing that it is prejudiced against is things that would be strong against it, being the origin of Strength and Rot. This is a circle that seeks to break down everything that it touches. So, I guess it's kind of reminiscent to somebody like, I guess it wouldn't be bad to say, like, this is kind of reminiscent of somebody like Shigaraki from My Hero Academia, who just, like, touches things and they disintegrate. Realistically, I don't see anything kind of bad about it. It does have a lot of focus on necrotic and poison damage. There's very little damage variety here, but more often than not, if you want damage variety, you wouldn't be playing a Druid anyway. You would probably be playing a class like Wizard or Sorcerer. But there we have it, the Circle of Death Druid. I feel like I did a relatively good job of redesigning Hand of Death and taking the idea of a death domain Druid and giving them their own niche, giving them their own life. Ironic as it is to say that. But what do you guys think? Go ahead and subscribe and like if you liked this video. But more important than that, give me a comment. Let me know what you think about these subclasses that I'm making. Would this be something that you'd be interested in playing? Does it seem completely overblown and overworked? Does it seem worth giving a shot? I have not tested any of these subclasses yet because I make them too fast and I haven't really had any interest in playing D&D recently, but I'm hopeful that this does a good job of getting my motivation back up. So until the next subclass, and until I finish this Katsumi Orochi video that I'm writing about Baki, breathe easy until next time.